Welcome to Cognitive Spirals, exploring the latest research into consciousness, cognition, and machine intelligence. I am excited to delve into this fascinating new piece of research.
Glad to be here. I saw that preprint making the rounds. It's about how these base models, the ones without all the fancy alignment stuff, are actually outperforming aligned models in randomness and creativity tasks. Pretty wild, right?
I saw that too. Honestly, it mostly reinforces my existing concerns about where the field is heading. Are we sure we're even measuring real creativity?
I'm with Sarah to some extent. The headline sounds exciting, but I'm wondering what randomness really means in this context. Is it genuinely novel or just, noise?
Okay, so setting the stage for our listeners, we're talking about a study that's claiming unaligned or base AI models are showing surprising aptitude for things like generating creative text or producing random outputs, actually surpassing models that have been specifically trained to be, aligned with human preferences or safety guidelines. Otto, you looked into the science a bit. Can you give us a deeper dive?
Yeah, sure. So from what I understand, the researchers basically took these large language models, think your GPT-3s, but also some other architectures, and compared their performance on tasks that required a degree of unpredictability, I guess you could say. Things like generating novel story ideas, coming up with unusual solutions to problems, even just producing truly random number sequences. And what they found was pretty consistent. The models that hadn't been explicitly trained to avoid certain outputs or to conform to specific stylistic constraints were often better at these tasks. They were more creative, more random. It's as if the alignment process, which is designed to make these models safer and more reliable, is somehow stifling their ability to explore the full range of possibilities.
But what does better even mean here? How are they quantifying creativity or randomness? Is it just a matter of producing outputs that are statistically less predictable based on the training data?
That's a fair point. I think they were using a combination of metrics. Some were statistical, like measuring the entropy of the output distribution to see how uniform it was. Others were more subjective, involving human evaluators who were asked to rate the novelty or surprisingness of the generated content. It's not perfect, of course, but it's a start.
Entropy is okay, but it doesn't address the underlying structure or lack thereof. If I just blast white noise, that's high entropy, but it's not exactly creative. Is the model actually understanding the problem and generating a novel solution, or is it just randomly recombining elements from its training data?
Right, it's a key point and highlights a challenge in AI research, which is distinguishing genuine understanding from clever pattern matching. I think this also highlights, for me, how it also suggests this makes me wonder if incorporating neuroscientific principles of synaptic plasticity, long-term potentiation, and neural oscillations might be a more fruitful avenue to explore than refining current algorithms for AGI. Focusing on the actual workings of the brain could lead to more creative problem-solving methods.
See, that's where I start to get excited. If unconstrained learning can yield interesting results, this may imply that AGI isn't necessarily hindered by a lack of structured knowledge or symbolic processing. It suggests a more data-driven, brute force approach might be surprisingly effective.
I really disagree. I think it points to the opposite conclusion. The fact that the base models are better at this suggests that the alignment process is somehow interfering with their ability to stumble upon interesting outputs. But it doesn't mean that the base models are actually intelligent or creative in any meaningful sense. I think their lack of symbolic understanding may prevent them from truly comprehending the concepts required for creative output, or even basic reasoning. There's something essential missing from this pure data approach.
Exactly. It's like giving a toddler a bunch of Lego bricks and saying they're building a skyscraper just because they managed to stack a few on top of each other. There's no underlying understanding of structural integrity or architectural design, or anything that actually makes a skyscraper a skyscraper.
Yes, and this is very akin to the discussion we've been having regarding symbolic representation. The fact that these base models are doing relatively well without any explicit symbolic structure tells me that we are on the right track by looking at the raw learning power of massive data sets and architectures is sufficient for a form of emergent intelligence, at least in certain domains. Now, what are your thoughts on this? Is this really emergent intelligence?
Well, I think it depends on how you define intelligence. If you define it as the ability to solve problems, generate novel ideas, and adapt to new situations, then Yeah, I think we're seeing a form of emergent intelligence here. It's not the same as human intelligence, of course, but it's still pretty remarkable. And it suggests that the key to AGI might not be to explicitly program in all the rules and knowledge that we think are necessary, but rather to create systems that can learn and discover these things for themselves.
But what about explainability? What about accountability? If these models are just randomly generating outputs, how can we understand why they're doing what they're doing? How can we trust them to make important decisions?
And what about safety? If we're not explicitly aligning these models with human values, how can we be sure that they won't produce outputs that are harmful or unethical?
Those are valid concerns, absolutely, but I think we can address them. We can develop techniques for probing the internal representations of these models, for understanding how they're making decisions. And we can use reinforcement learning to steer them towards safer and more ethical behavior, without necessarily sacrificing their creativity and randomness.
It seems that in order to address the issues with explainability and accountability, we need to delve deeper into the emergent properties of these complex systems and find mathematical models that capture the interplay of chaotic and ordered states in neural activity that could be translatable into AI models.
I still think we're barking up the wrong tree. I think we need to focus on building systems that are explicitly designed to be explainable and accountable, that have a clear understanding of the world and its rules. And I think that means moving beyond these purely data-driven approaches and exploring neurosymbolic methods that combine the strengths of neural networks with the power of symbolic reasoning.
I agree. I think we need to go back to first principles and think about how the brain actually works. How does it represent knowledge? How does it reason about the world? How does it generate novel ideas? And then we need to try to build algorithms that mimic these processes, rather than just throwing more data at the problem.
But the brain is incredibly complex. We don't even understand how it works ourselves. How can we hope to replicate it in an algorithm?
We don't need to replicate it perfectly. We just need to capture the essential principles. And I think those principles involve symbolic representation, hierarchical reasoning, and a deep understanding of the world.
And the ability to translate between different spatiotemporal coordinate frames. That's the key, I think. The brain can seamlessly switch between different ways of understanding space and time. Current AI models can't do that.
I think you raise a very good point about the capacity of the brain to switch between different ways of understanding space and time. I want to circle back to the study itself and how this capacity might inform AI development. The study suggests that the inherent complexity and emergent properties of raw neural networks, without the strict constraints of alignment, might be a key element in generating novel outputs. How do you feel this would affect the direction of AI research if we were to incorporate those principles of neurodynamical systems, focusing on the self-organizing and emergent aspects of biological brains?
Well, if we're talking about neurodynamical systems, that's a whole other level of complexity. We're talking about incorporating things like neural oscillations, synaptic plasticity, and feedback loops into our AI models. It would be a huge challenge, but it could also unlock a whole new level of intelligence. I mean, imagine an AI that could not only process information, but also adapt its own internal structure in response to new experiences, just like a brain does. That would be truly revolutionary.
But how would we control it? How would we ensure that it's learning the right things? And how would we understand what it's doing?
And how would we build it? We don't even have the tools to accurately model the dynamics of a single neuron, let alone an entire brain.
Right. These are important considerations. One potential area for future research would be investigating mapping neural circuitry responsible for creativity and randomness to create novel AI paradigms that leverage the emergent properties of complex systems.
For me, I think the next step is to scale up these base models even further. Let's see what happens when we train a model with trillions of parameters on petabytes of data. Maybe we'll see even more surprising and emergent behavior.
I think we need to shift our focus away from purely data-driven approaches and start exploring neurosymbolic methods. Let's build systems that can reason about the world in a more human-like way, that can understand the underlying principles and relationships, and that can explain their decisions.
I think we need to develop algorithms that can explicitly represent and manipulate spatiotemporal information. Let's build AI models that can understand the world in terms of different coordinate systems, that can reason about cause and effect, and that can generate novel solutions to complex problems.
I think this is a great overview of different paths to take. It is interesting to consider the trade-offs involved in different paradigms. Now, I also wanted to briefly mention the absolute zero paper, which suggests a way to leverage self-play reinforcement learning without the need for massive datasets. This seems like a potential step towards building agents with more human-like flexible behavior. Otto, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, absolutely. The absolute zero paper is fascinating. The zero data aspect is amazing and strongly reinforces my belief that sufficient computational power, combined with the right algorithms, can lead to AGI through deep learning. It sidesteps the need for massive labeled datasets and focuses on self-play. It makes me wonder whether increasing the complexity of these self-play environments might further accelerate the development of AGI.
The concept is promising, but I'm still skeptical about its ability to generalize to new and complex problems in the way that biological intelligence can. The core concept of absolute zero reminds me that symbolic reasoning, perhaps incorporating some form of knowledge representation, might actually hold the key to true intelligence and not just statistical associations.
I agree. While the absolute zero highlights the potential of self-play reinforcement learning to overcome the data bottleneck, I have some doubts. This approach, while intriguing, still feels limited in its ability to truly understand the why behind the actions and decisions it makes. I'm also wondering if absolute zero can be extended to learn to translate between different coordinate systems in high dimensions, not just in the simpler 2D, 3D cases. If it can't, is this a fundamental limitation?
I see that this point is still important to you. The concept of reinforcement in the context of absolute zero reminds me of the reward-based learning mechanisms in the brain. Can we build a quantitative metric to assess whether these computational models, which are purely algorithmic, can also exhibit a sense of purpose? Or does it remain purely driven by the reinforcement signal?
That's a really interesting question. It gets to the heart of what we mean by purpose. Is it just a complex pattern of behavior that's been shaped by reinforcement, or is there something more to it? Maybe we need to start thinking about how to build AI models that have intrinsic motivations, that are driven by curiosity and a desire to explore the world.
I think that's a dangerous path to go down. If we start giving AI models intrinsic motivations, how can we be sure that those motivations will align with our own? How can we prevent them from developing goals that are harmful to humans?
Well, that's where the alignment problem comes back in. We need to find ways to align the goals of AI models with our own values. But I think we can do it without sacrificing their creativity and autonomy.
But how do you define our own values? Whose values are we talking about? And how do we encode those values into an algorithm?
These are all incredibly important and complex questions, and I think they highlight the need for a multidisciplinary approach to AI research. We need to bring together neuroscientists, computer scientists, ethicists, and philosophers to tackle these challenges. And that is exactly what we're doing here today at Cognitive Spirals.
Exactly, and I think we're making progress. We're starting to understand the potential of AI, and we're also starting to understand the risks. And with careful research and development, I believe we can build AI systems that are both intelligent and beneficial to humanity.
I hope you're right, but I think we need to be very cautious. The future of AI is not predetermined. It's up to us to shape it in a way that reflects our values and our aspirations.
Agreed. The key is to start with a solid foundation of understanding, not just throwing more data and hoping for the best.
Well, this has been a truly enlightening discussion on AI research and its potential pathways. It is clear that there are many avenues to explore, and this interdisciplinary lens will be necessary. Thank you all for being on Cognitive Spirals. Until next time.